a leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C., where he consults with foreign governments, corporations, and advocacy groups. He has got a heck of a resume, 26-year career on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch, most recently the staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Lester, good evening, and welcome to the Tim Jones Show.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Lester, in the first of all, just in the world of It's a Small World After All group, I want you to know that Kristen Strobel is a friend of mine, one of your colleagues.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow. She's terrific. Yeah, we're lucky to have her. She's very young, but already a terrific consultant and lobbyist.
Yes, my cousin Sarah has lived in D.C. for almost a decade and became friends with Kristen a long time ago, and so I met her over the years. And yeah, she's extremely impressive, and I'm glad that she's with you now. So yeah,
she's
small world.
Make more money.
Yeah, exactly. So, Lester, let's start with the news that led off the week, which was the U.S. Embassy is going to finally now be in Jerusalem after being promised that it would be there for so many years. And boy, you would if you'd watch any of the networks except maybe Fox News, this was like the end of the world that this was happening.
Yeah. Well, you do. We're reminded of the fact that U.S.-Israel relations kind of take a very different tone with a lot of folks in the media, and they're very critical of our relationship with the Jewish state, which is something that the American people have supported for generations. It's bipartisan. It's folks in the Midwest, folks on the coast. This has had a broad base of support, with the exception of some folks on the far left of the Democratic Party, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, Lester, even Chuck Schumer, I mean, they kind of swept it under the rug, but even Chuck Schumer released a statement this week saying he was basically glad this finally happened and congratulating Netanyahu.
That's right. And, we can talk about, I think you were mentioning earlier, Bibi Netanyahu was mentioning that, I think it was 70 years ago, Harry Truman was the president when the U.S. recognized Israel. He was a Democrat. He was a liberal Democrat. There's a long tradition, even among liberal Democrats, of supporting the U.S.-Israel relationship. Not quite as true anymore as it used to be, which is unfortunate, because as you pointed out, there's real bipartisan support for a strong relationship and for seeing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yeah, Lester, so tell me, in your opinion, was it important for President Trump to do this at this point in time? A lot of people are saying, yeah, we said we were going to do this going back decades, as you say, back to Truman's time. But the criticism I heard was, well, this wasn't the right time. People were saying, I'm like, well, when was the right time? I mean, was this?
Yeah, it's like the decision to have kids.
Right.
It's never quite the right time, but sometimes you just got to do it. Actually, I do think it was in this case, I think it was the right time. I'll give you two thoughts. One is President Obama, I think, had done a pretty poor job of communicating U.S. support for Israel during his administration. So there was a lot of ground to make up. President Trump had to kind of fix that relationship. This bold statement does that to a very, very great degree, I think. I mean, it's demonstrating to everyone that the U.S. is solidly behind Israel and always will be. Second thought, though, which is a little bit different, is we do have to we can't back the Palestinians into a corner. And it's important, even as we show great support for Israel, that we also give the Palestinians a way to constructively engage. They should see that there's an alternative to these crazy, violent demonstrations that their leaders have pushed. They need to see that there's a way dealing with the U.S. and Israel that can lead to a peaceful solution.
Speaking to Lester Munson, he is a principal at the BGR Group, which is based out of Washington, D.C. They do a lot of work in a lot of different fields. Lester's specialty is in foreign relations, international affairs. Lester, can you explain to our audience, why were we hearing this week that most of the Western European countries were upset about this decision and did not favor it, but you had strange bedfellows like Israel joined by Saudi Arabia that did approve of this, did approve of this move? Why that disparity?
Well, there's still kind of a lingering support for the Palestinian cause with our European allies. They appear to be less concerned than we do about the violent and kind of suicidal nature of the path the Palestinians have chosen. Whereas our Arab allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and others, the plight of the Palestinians has they've kind of reached almost an exhaustion point where there have been multiple attempts at brokering a peace accord. Various U.S. presidents, even President Clinton, went a long way down the road towards Israeli-Palestinian peace, and the Palestinians aren't just able to; they're not able to pull the trigger at the end and sign a deal with Israel. And I think what you're seeing among their Arab brothers in these mostly Gulf states is just exhaustion with that position. It's not sustainable. The new rise of Iran in the Middle East, which was somewhat facilitated by the Iran nuclear deal, has really galvanized the Arab countries to be more concerned about what Iran is doing than the dispute between Israel and the Palestinians.
Interesting. Let's move to Iran. I know that is a specialty area of yours, especially when you were chief of staff for Senator Mark Kirk, and it's something I know that you and the senator worked on quite a bit. Iran issues relating to the Iranian state. I've heard people. This has really not been as partisan as much as it's philosophical, because I've heard Republicans who liked what the president did about disengaging from that deal. I've heard Republicans that have not. I've heard same thing on the Democratic side of the aisle. I've heard Democrats that they voted against the Iran deal back under the Obama administration. Obama went ahead and went through with it, and I've heard ones that supported it. So where do you come down on what the president did over the last couple of weeks, and where should we go from here?
Well, I'd give it lukewarm support. I think he should have waited a little bit longer and put more pressure on our European allies to come up with either an amendment to the deal or a better deal that we could work with Iran on. The fundamental flaw with the Iran deal right now, or before the president pulled us out of it a few days ago, was that the deadlines or the sunsets for restrictions on Iranian behavior were coming way too soon. In other words, as soon as 2024, the Iranians could begin key parts of their nuclear weapons program again. That's just way too soon. So a smart deal would extend those deadlines by another, let's say, 20 or 30 years, take them into 2050 or beyond. If we could arrange that would actually make the Iran nuclear deal a pretty good deal. In balance, it was not a good deal. We gave them way too much for way too little. But I think right now, with the president having pulled us out, it's a bold move. Again, and this president is prone to making bold moves and kind of stirring things up and causing a little bit of chaos, and he thinks that chaos can provide an opportunity for him to get some things done. And I think he might be right in this case, and let's hope he is. That by pulling out, we can work with our European allies, with London, Paris, and Berlin, and get them to side with us in talking to the Iranians for a tougher deal, for a deal that has much longer sunsets, things that will restrict their nuclear weapons program for a longer amount of time than the original deal.
Speaking of Lester Munson, he's a principal at the BGR Group based out of Washington, D.C., but they work on matters around the world, and international items are Lester's specialty. Lester, I want to move you to one last topic, and that's North Korea, of course. But I've always wanted to ask someone this question, and I think you're probably the perfect person to ask. So in both North Korea's case and Iran's case, our interests are we're very concerned, the United States is very concerned about these two countries obtaining weaponizable, usable nuclear weapons that they can launch, into our shores or into our allies. Who's more of a threat right now? Do we know who's further along, North Korea or Iran?
In terms of nuclear weapons, I don't think there's any question that North Korea is a much more substantial threat. They've actually carried out nuclear tests. They've had nuclear explosions. They've tested dozens of ballistic missile tests. They have some, it's very likely that they have some missiles that could reach our shores, but just as worrisome, they have a lot of short-range missiles that can reach South Korea and Japan and hold our key allies a threat. And remember, we've got thousands of troops in both South Korea and Japan. Mm-hmm. So there are Americans at risk in both of those places. Mm-hmm. Iran never actually detonated a nuclear device. Their missile technology is not as advanced as North Koreans. In fact, they were reliant on the North Koreans for a lot of the stuff that they had. So there's no question that North Korea is a bigger threat. Iran, if you kind of put the nuclear weapons aside, Iran is a bigger threat to U.S. interests in the sense that it's actively undermining our allies in the Middle East. It's now engaged in what is kind of a low-intensity conflict with Israel over Syrian land and airspace. So Iran is probably, in the grand scheme of things, a bigger threat. But in terms of nuclear weapons, North Korea comes out ahead.
So let's wrap up here. We'll talk about North Korea. There, as we were heading into the weekend, the news was sort of all over the place as to whether or not the June Singapore summit with the president and Kim Jong-un, was it on? Was it off? Kim Jong-un seemed to be getting cold feet. Sort of making up ways where he was maybe going to back out of this. Are you hearing anything from any of your sources? Are we full speed ahead for this thing? And is this just Kim Jong-un kind of blast from the past? I mean, they've done this before. If people remember these negotiations in the past, I mean, what are you hearing on this potential summit?
Well, everyone's being very cautious because North Korea does have this history of saying things that they don't mean and signing deals that they don't intend to follow through on. The other thing to remember is, at the end of the day, North Korea's most important relationship is with China. About 90% of North Koreans' economy is dependent on China in terms of imports and exports. China is their protector. They really can't make any moves without approval from the Chinese. And right now, the U.S. and China are engaged in some very high-stakes economic negotiations over tariffs and market access and intellectual property and technology transfer, some big topics. It's very likely that the trouble we're seeing in the setup of the summit has a lot to do with the U.S.-China trade negotiations, which are ongoing even this weekend. There's been a lot of news even today about different statements from our Treasury Secretary and our trade negotiator, different approaches to China. So this is now a game of three-dimensional chess. It's not checkers anymore. It's a very complicated game involving Beijing, us, North Korea, and some others. And I think you almost have to pay attention on an hourly basis to know what's going on.
Fantastic. Well, Lester, thanks so much for all your time this evening. We covered a great deal of ground, I think, extremely well. I would love to have you back sometime here on the Tim Jones Show.
Me too. Thanks, Tim.
Hey, thanks, Lester. Have a great evening. That was Lester Munson with the BGR Group, BGRDC.com. This is Tim Jones and the Tim Jones Show. We're going to bring things back home when we come back. We'll speak with Missouri State Representative Kurt Barr. He'll be in studio here in the overly ostentatious, opulent studios down here in downtown St. Louis in the Heartland.
This is the Tim Jones Show.
I resent the remark about making America great again.
On FM News Talk 97.1.